Real attacks and fake factories. Honeypots expose risks to smart manufacturing systems.
Hi, Mike. You have a very really interesting story about like a fake honeypot kind of thing for ICS-based systems. Can you elaborate more about that one?
Sure. So there's a lot of concern, a lot of press about, Internet connected, Internet of Things, and particularly as this intersects with the manufacturing sector and various, smart plants and smart manufacturing type environments. But, it's always interesting because you don't see a lot of or as much data around what the actual threats are as you do with other types of more traditional networks. And some researchers decided that they were going to set up a hyper-realistic honeypot emulating a smart factory. And they actually modeled all of the components inside of a smart factory, everything from programmable logic controllers to human-machine interface instances, other components, and even went so far as to create actual company website for the fake company, complete with, anonymized customer profiles, as well as employee stories and things like that. So they really pushed the envelope, if you will, from a realism perspective on this, effectively, advanced honeypot, specifically looking to see what types of attacks they would get against this smart manufacturing infrastructure. And the results that they had were really intriguing. The first thing that stood out to me was that after they put this thing online in about March of last year, it took 2 months for them to start to see attacks against it, which is interesting because usually when you see data about vulnerable Windows systems connected to the internet, you start to see attacks on those types of platforms within minutes. So the fact that it took 2 months for someone to start identifying this and attacking this was interesting. And it wasn't because they didn't have an attack surface. The researchers actually made all of the mistakes you would expect an under-resourced, understaffed IT shop to make. And they had many common ports open to the internet that were associated with various IoT devices as well as remote administration capabilities. But after 2 months, they started to see some interesting activity. First was that they started to see those systems being used to facilitate fraudulent activities against other third parties. So these were things like obfuscating purchasing of phones or trying to do number port out schemes or gift card fraud or payment fraud types of things. And then shortly after that, they started to see crypto mining related activity. So people would log in, identify the systems, they'd start to deploy crypto miners, and then would continue to come back and restart the crypto miners every so often in the event that they stopped producing for them. But what I thought was particularly intriguing was the ransomware instances that eventually made their way into the system. So over about a 9-month period, they had 3 quote-unquote instances of ransomware that popped up while they were doing this study. First was Crisis, and the next variant was Phobos, delivered by different threat actors. But the interesting part was that in both cases, the threat actors logged in, identified the systems, gained access, and then manually deployed the ransomware. So they weren't compromised by some sort of bot or other type of automated process. This was something that the threat actor logged in, looked around, determined what needed to be deployed, downloaded packages, manually took the action to encrypt the environment, and then move forward from there. In the case of the Crisis malware, they asked them for a $10,000 ransom, and they eventually negotiated them down to $6,000 before they just reset the environment. Which, that was interesting, I thought, just because of the number associated with that. Usually you hear numbers that are typically a bit larger. And then the third attempt that was made for ransomware seemed to be by someone who was really a very inept threat actor because they didn't really deploy a crypto virus. What they did was kind of upload some tools that it didn't seem like they really knew how to use and then just managed to rename everything and open up some tabs in an internet browser that pointed to some adult content in Germany to kind of make people know they were there, and asked them for $750 in Bitcoin. So that was one of those where I would personally kind of chalk that one up to your kind of script kiddie, really unsophisticated threat actor, which kind of shows the continuum of risks that these organizations are going to face.
Mike, do you think maybe they kind of had an idea this was a honeypot style setup? Like maybe it was too good to be true, so the teams that were, maybe get involved with like Ryuk or TrickBot are like, you know what, maybe we'll stay away from this one. We'll let the little guys go in and see what happens. Maybe it seemed like a setup. I don't know. It's
tough to say, because like when you start looking at like Ryuk and other types of more advanced ransomware, those programs know when they're running in a virtualized environment. They know when they're running in like an analyst workbench or something like that, and they'll take action to shut themselves down. And this environment did use VirtualBox quite a bit, as part of the platform. So there may have been something along those lines. But I think that I think that what this shows us is the infection vector may be a little bit different, because with Ryuk and other types of ransomware you traditionally see, a lot of times phishing attacks or convincing a user to click on something really is that initial infection vector. And in this case, they're compromising poorly secured VNC connections or other weakly secured IoT devices, and there's not that human interaction component. So it's forcing the attackers to be more manual about things.
I'll say it's possible maybe these industrial control systems are part of the specific threat actors.
Okay.
So as actually Mike is alluding, I think this is evolving threat. But in near future, we may see lots of attacks or vulnerabilities targeting these devices. And also, I like the point, maybe the threat actors needs to interact with manually. So it may not be the high up top on their list.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, if they're looking for the more value for time.
Right. Automated.
You try to go for the automation rather than doing the manual stuff most of the time.
Right.
But it doesn't mean the threats are not there. I mean, the threat vectors are there, experts are there. Because I read that the report, they went to the great lengths to use different PLCs and programs, stuff like that, to create the relay environment.
And I mean, I did read a little bit in there that they said nobody actually took over any control systems, right, during this honeypot setup. They just kind of looked around.
Yeah, they were attacked. They were able to access them, but beyond that, I didn't see where they actually took any actions to try and reset things.
Mm-hmm.
But this does go to the point where just because you can do something like connect your IoT environment to the internet doesn't necessarily mean you should. So, it really is one of those things where you have to weigh, the benefit versus the risks. And if you are going to do this, take the kinds of controls and steps that we see today, right? Require people to access the environment remotely via VPN. Require two-factor authentication. Follow best practices when hardening your devices. Reset, default passwords and credentials. Make sure they're not there. And, any other hardening that is, available to you. These simple kinds of things would really help prevent a lot of these types of opportunistic attacks.
You want to lock everything down and only unlock as you need. So you want to deny all, zero trust, right? And then as people in your company need access, you want to analyze that access. You want to vet that person, that user, and give them the privilege if they need, and then you open the port if necessary.